Hello, this is Rosalind Salkis. I'm at Tate Britain with Chris Stevens, the lead curator of modern British art.
Hi.
And we are here to look at the Hockney exhibition that Tate Britain's opening on Thursday. It's a major retrospective. It's possibly the biggest ever done. Chris will correct me if I'm wrong. And it spans the artist's work from the 60s. Actually, there's one thing slightly earlier, which we'll show you. But essentially spans work from the 60s through to 2016. And that 2016 work actually hasn't been seen before. We'll have a look at that at the end of the tour. So here we are. We're starting in the very first room with a wonderful image called Blue Stools. And Chris Stevens is just going to talk us through some of the artwork that's in this room, which I think gives us an idea of some of Hockney's interests and concerns.
Yeah, the works in this first room are from different periods, and they kind of raise the key themes we wanted to emphasize. This is a work, The Four Blue Stools, from 2014. It's one of a group of images Hockney made, which at first sight look like photographs. And then when you look at them more closely, you see there's something going on. For a start, you see the same figures appearing across the photograph. And also, as you look at it, the space, you realize it's impossibly deep. This is actually made of images of his studio. And what he's done, which is very like the photographs he made in the 80s, is he's taken hundreds or thousands of close-up photographs of objects and people, and then they've been digitally stitched together in the computer, actually by this guy, his assistant, Jonathan.
Yes.
And then they've dropped images of recent paintings in as well. So one of Hockney's, what his art is all about, really, is questioning how we make pictures and how we look at pictures.
And I think we see some of that in the rest of the room, don't we? These are examples sort of across the years of these kinds of preoccupations.
So across the room there's a work called Kirby, which is based on an etching by William Hogarth, which, from the 18th century, which was a satire on perspective. Hockney's been satirizing perspective all his life.
Yes.
Because, what he wants us, he's interested in thinking about how we make pictures and how we capture the real world of time and space and movement in two dimensions. One of the conventions since the Renaissance has been using one-point perspective, and one of his key things is that isn't how we see the world. Mm-hmm. One-point perspective, he says, is like looking at the world like a paralyzed cyclops.
Yes.
And so you see here how perspective can go wrong. The statue in the foreground has a fishing rod which is entering the water behind the figure in the distance, and the man on the hill is lighting his pipe from the woman's candle leaning out of the window. So, he's saying these are all conventions and protocols that we can abandon, that they're just, it's just a way of illusionism. And so these works in different ways deal with illusionism.
So we're always looking at, he's always looking at ways of seeing things, the way people...
Yeah, exactly. So, this is a work here where is
This work called Rubber Ring Floating in a Swimming Pool.
Yeah. So in one way, it's the most abstract work Hockney made. It's very like abstract painting of the 1960s. But it's also the most realistic because it's based on a photograph, and you can see how, almost in a photorealist way, he's replicated the rubber ring, the stone edge of the pool, and then even the bubbles the water's pumping out.
Yes.
So he's deliberately playing with that kind of tension between abstraction, which of course he was always fighting against. Abstraction was the dominant art form when Hockney emerged in the 60s.
In the 60s. He went to the Royal College of Art here, didn't he, in London?
That's right. So the room we've just come into is work he made at the Royal College. He arrived in 1960 and immediately moved from a kind of traditional figurative style to a manner that sort of, he took up the kind of informal abstraction of the time, particularly kind of European style, and then turned it into something queer, essentially.
This room has work that one wouldn't immediately think of as Hockney-like.
Yeah.
Is this how he started off when he first painted as a young man?
Yes, it is. There's this sudden breakthrough, and he sort of takes that abstract language and turns it into something, what he calls homosexual propaganda.
Really?
He came in his first year at the Royal College. He comes out, and he starts immediately making these paintings about, kind of male couples.
Yes.
And he was obsessed with Cliff Richard, who was sort of, in the charts, and a beautiful young man.
Was that very controversial at the time?
I think it was very courageous. I think it's one of those things that's coded enough where people saw as much as they needed to. It
Yes.
wasn't explicit.
Yes. Like this picture, for example.
So this is a slightly later picture. This room now is work made after he left the Royal College, and he famously called this group of works pictures of people in, which is, again, I think, a sort of dig at abstract artists. You know, so
Yes.
interesting pictures have people
Have
in
people
doing
in them.
stuff. He made 2 domestic scenes of his friends in English interiors, and then this is an imaginary Los Angeles scene before he's been there, based on kind of soft porn photographs that used
Yes.
to come from LA
Yes.
this is a sort of photo story of a kind of gay Cinderella.
Yes.
So this is the sort of put upon stepbrother who has to scrub his
Yes.
his brother's back
Yes.
in the shower, and that's exactly the sort of fantasy that Hockney had when he went to the West Coast for the first time, painting landscapes in Colorado and so on. And then in 64, 65, he settles in LA.
And this room that we're moving into has some of the most famous images that people know of Hockney's work, notably this
Yeah,
picture
the
that we're
Bigger
about to look
Splash.
at called A Bigger Splash.
I mean, Hockney arrived in LA and realized that no one had really painted the city. And so he kind of thought, well, this is my job, I can do
Yes.
this. And he's so excited by the kind of the wide open spaces of the boulevards, the sort of the orthogonal straight lines of that mid-century modern architecture, and the pools and the blue skies. And so you see him capturing the essence of the place in The Bigger Splash, and the lawn being sprinkled, sunbathers and so on. But also, I think, again, he's playing with abstraction. You know, these are very, very formal. It's all done with a ruler and straight lines. And it is, in some ways, it's quite like abstract painting. You know, there was
Yes.
an artist, Kenneth Noland, who made target-like paintings floating on a canvas field, as these do, rather like a photograph. And it's like he takes the language of abstraction and then injects a bit of real life, some palm trees and reflection, and most crucially, that great splash. And I think, again, there's a sort of skit on, you know, the sort of splashy abstract painting of Jackson Pollock and others, which was all about macho spontaneity, whereas
Yes.
Hockney has sort of spent 3 or 4 days meticulously painting this splash.
Yes.
Which, if you look closely, is slightly pink at the bottom. That's just hinting at the body that's
There's
just
a body there.
gone into the
Yes.
water.
Yes. This is Rosalind Salkers for the New York Times. We're at the Hockney exhibition at Tate Britain, talking to Chris Stevens, one of the curators of this marvelous retrospective that's opening on Thursday and runs through May 29th, if I'm not wrong.
That's right.
We're moving into a room that contains some other of Hockney's best-known paintings, which are a series of sort of dual portraits. Are they all dual portraits? Yes, I think they are.
There are a few
Almost,
others, but
yes.
yeah, that's the thing that dominates this period of work.
And we're looking, I think, we are looking straight at a portrait of Christopher Isherwood and
Don Bacardi, who was
Yes.
Isherwood's partner at the time.
Yes.
And in a way, this continues something we were talking about earlier, because there's something. It looks like a very conventional painting, and you know, the style has become more conventional. It's got more perspective in it. The space is more realistic than in The Bigger Splash. But there's also kind of sexual politics about it, which, because Isherwood and Bacardi were known in Santa Monica as one of the first gay couples to live like a married couple. And so I think in portraying them as, you know, an ordinary conservative couple, if you like, though maybe their sexuality is hinted at by the banana and the sweet corn on the table
Yes.
right in the middle there.
Yes.
You know, I think Hockney's making a very bold statement
Yes.
about, you know, the normalising of gay
domesticating
relationships.
it,
Yeah.
yes.
In
Yeah.
1967, yes, the year it was decriminalised in Britain.
And here, just to the left of this, of that portrait, we have another very, very famous one of the British designer Ossie Clarke and his wife, his then wife Celia
Birtwell, yeah.
Birtwell. And I remember reading somewhere that he said this took him a year to paint.
Yeah, I mean,
And
each of
it's so
these...
meticulous.
Exactly. Each of these was painted over a long period of time using a combination of sketches and photographs and a lot of reworking, because it was very complicated. But again, you know, it's very carefully mapped out. The structure of it's carefully mapped out, and then the figures are laid on top of that structure. And again, it's a slightly sort of peculiar relationship. You know, Ossie and Celia were married, but Ossie was bisexual, and I think in this one in particular, but in all of them, there is a sense that the third person, you know, the artist, is part of this relationship. So these are double portraits, but they're also portraits of a relationship.
Yes.
And it's a relationship in which he is part.
Yes.
You know, they're all portraits of friends.
Oh, yes, portraits of friendships. Yes.
But also there are portraits of places. You see London, you see New York, or you know, and here there aren't any figures, but
Yes.
in this painting of the window at the Louvre, you very much know that you're in Paris.
Yes, absolutely, in those formal gardens. We have a question from someone watching.
One of our readers called Kimanzi Kaki from Kenya
Okay.
is noted that unless these are explained, it's quite difficult to understand what these paintings represent. Is that something that you can sort of talk to us a little bit more about?
Okay. Well, yeah, I think some are probably easier than others, because certainly the ones we're looking at are fairly traditional portraits. In fact, one of the things, you know, Hockney had to deal with in this period was that he found himself getting drawn into a style that's more and more naturalistic, to the extent that he didn't know where to go with it, because it almost becomes like photographs. So they are very much, you know, about portraying people and places, but also capturing the character of. I think one of his great skills is capturing the character of a person, you know, through their distinctive, you know, posture,
stance,
but
yes.
also of place. You know, LA,
Yes.
and we'll see later the Yorkshire landscape. So he does, you know, he and here in Paris, London, New York, he's trying to get the essence of somewhere. You know, what it feels like to be in that place.
I think there's a portrait just to the right of the Isherwood portrait that's very, very interesting in exactly the way you've been
Yeah.
speaking about, which it speaks so strongly of personality and power relations. It's such a curious.
I think that, I mean, this is really a strange portrait. This is a portrait of one of Hockney's great friends, Henry Goldthaler, who was curator of contemporary art at the Met in New York, and Henry's partner, Christopher Scott. And you can feel, you know, the Henry sort of, you know, a confident posture sitting in the sofa, and Christopher's very awkward, stiff, standing posture.
He looks like he's waiting for some sort of instruction.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And all of these portraits have this strange disconnection. The figures are always looking in different directions.
Yes.
But also what I love about this is that, you know, the portrayal of New York in the
Yes,
background, which is,
yes.
you know, Henry's home city. And it's a portrayal which is kind of realistic, but also, I think, based on earlier paintings of New York. You can feel
Yes.
Charles Sheeler, Edward Hopper has gone into that painting.
Yes.
So it's an idea of the place.
We have another question.
Muriel Mizrahi Lasri is asking, what is the importance of windows for Hockney?
Right, okay. Well, it's just at this period, actually, as he moved away from those flat paintings of Los Angeles, that the windows really come to the fore, because the fall of light, as he becomes more realistic, more naturalistic, the fall of light becomes important. So he uses the light that comes in to help articulate the space of the rooms. And one of his fascinations is with transparency. That's why one of the things about the swimming pool is how do you capture water that's transparent and always moving. And you can see it here in the table as well.
Yes.
How, you know, how do you describe in paint something that is see-through?
And he worked in acrylics here, didn't he? Which is, or is it not?
Yeah, no,
on
that's
these-
right. Yeah,
these
he,
paintings? And those are very, if I'm not mistaken, they dry very quickly and they're hard to change, aren't they?
That's right. So
Yeah.
these paintings, he started using acrylic in the mid-60s, like many artists. And so these you can see are very thinly painted and meticulously planned, because the possibility of scraping off and reworking or disguising your corrections is much harder.
Harder, yes. So he would spend a very long time actually drawing and plotting
Yes, so these are
exactly.
very much based on precise drawing.
Yes. And another question.
Jaslyn Headings is asking, if Hockney were painting these today, do you think it would be received or recognized as progressive? He seemed to be ahead of his time.
It's interesting, because I'm not sure they were seen as progressive at the time. I think there was a debate going on. You know, these double portraits he was making when minimalism and then conceptual art was kind of coming to it was at the cutting edge of contemporary practice. So in a way he was always making a rather rear guard statement about the
Yes.
importance of subject matter and representation.
And realism in a
And
way.
realism.
I mean, were these seen as old-fashioned? Were they
I think
criticised
they
at
were
the
seen as
time?
old-fashioned. I mean, they were loved at the time.
Yes.
But he's always been fighting that battle.
Yes.
And still is. And I think, you know, one of the exciting things about seeing this show as a whole is that the work changes and he goes off in strange directions at moments. It all comes, you know, there's a consistency. And it's partly that he's always making pictures about pictures. What is it to make? How do you represent the world? But the heart of that is this kind of very human thing about, you know, the interesting thing about the world is us in it and how we see it and feel it and how do you describe that?
Yes. We're looking here at the very earliest piece in the exhibition, which is a self-portrait from 1954 when he would have been just 15. So that's kind of
He's 16,
fantasy.
I think
16,
he was. But yeah,
yes.
but you can see how, you know, his already has that. I mean, it's quite a sort of art schooly drawing, but at the same time, there is a natural facility. I mean, he is the most brilliant draftsman, and that's at the root of everything he does. There are almost times when you feel he has to try and stop drawing to escape that.
And this room is full of drawings, actually, which we're going to move through quite swiftly, but it is actually full of fascinating pieces, including portraits of Andy Warhol, which we're just looking at now. I think there's another one of Auden.
That's right. So there's a series of portraits of friends and famous people, but also still lives and landscapes.
Yes, and very
sort of
detailed
architecture.
Observation, isn't there? Of
Well, he
everything.
has this amazing ability to give you a very great sense of what he's drawing with very minimal means. You have a few lines and you get the feeling of, you know, the three-dimensional feeling of a cushion or something.
Yes. We're now in a room entitled A Bigger Photography, where we're looking at something that Hockney was interested in for a couple of years. I think he called them joiners, didn't he? Where he collaged multiple images of photographs to make an overall landscape or canvas.
That's right. I mean, in the early 80s, I think, you know, trying to get out of that trap of naturalism, as he called it, he sort of re-engaged with the idea of cubism, of art that gives you a better description of real time and space by showing things from different points of view.
Yes.
And he does it in painting and he does it in photography. He starts actually with Polaroids.
Great.
The earliest of these are Polaroids, you know, which were, you ought to explain what they are now, but they were kind of instant photographs that would come out of the camera. And so he would use the camera to sort of focus in on different details of a scene. And then, as you say, he called them joiners because he then lays them together in this grid. And then from there, he started making photo collages where he'd use a conventional camera and then sort of paste all the photographs. And he'd send them down to Snappy Snaps or something and then paste them all together to get away from the single lens, you know, domination of photography.
Yes, and to show sort of multiplicity, the way one sees things actually in real
exactly,
life.
and different spaces as you move around. And you see that here.
I'm sorry, go on.
Well, this is a great painting called Nichols Canyon. It's doing the same thing. It's trying to describe a landscape as you know it by moving through it. And its great sort of zigzagging pattern comes from the fact that at the end of the 70s he moved back to Los Angeles, but now he was living at the top of the Hollywood Hills instead of in the flatlands of Santa Monica.
Yes.
And he had a studio lower down in Hollywood, so every day he would drive down and then back up these winding canyon roads, Nichols Canyon, Outpost Drive. And one of the great paintings, which is too big to bring here, which is in Los Angeles, is Mulholland Drive, that describes the great road along the top of the hill. So it's both a kind of fairly accurate description of what it feels like to drive through that landscape. And it's sort of playing with that artistic idea. It's a kind of cubist landscape.
Yes,
because the cubists like Picasso never really managed landscape. They did portraits brilliantly, but how you describe a temporal experience of place.
This room is also full of the most extraordinary colour. Was that a particular period in his work?
Yeah, I mean, the colour varies over time. But the key thing is the way he treats space. And then at the end of this period, in the early 90s, he makes these little abstracts, which he calls very new paintings. And they look like they're just flat abstract paintings until you look closely, and you can see how he's playing with the illusions of depth.
Yes.
And in particular, these sort of receding planes. I mean, they're flat until he puts forms on them and then little shadows, and then immediately they appear to disappear in the distance. And one of the most exciting things for me in this show is how you see them then reappear in actual landscapes a few years later. So
like
in here he's looking at Yorkshire, he's looking at the Grand Canyon, but in all of these you get the same theme of this foreground plane with the bales of straw here in Yorkshire, or the scrubby bushes in the foreground of the canyon paintings that help give this sense of a space that's going away from us. But again, all of these are based on multiple viewpoints. So getting away from that sense of traditional perspective, which is one of the reasons why he started using multiple canvases.
And the way that some of the canvases are cut into squares.
Exactly,
I presume
yeah, so
represents, like we're going to see in this room now. That
I mean,
we're
it partly allows him to make big paintings and still be able to move them around.
Yes, yes.
But it also, helps emphasize that sense of, a painting doesn't have to be, just one receding view. I mean, actually, he almost plays with that, because this painting in the middle, called The Tunnel, is precisely that. It's a sort of traditional perspectival view down a tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
But then next to it, this view of the woods, you can see actually the space goes off in 3 different directions.
Yes.
Which is an idea he's taken straight from Van Gogh. And suddenly in these late landscapes, which were made in the 2000s, when he'd moved back to Yorkshire for about a decade, Van Gogh becomes much more the point of reference than Picasso had been, both in that space, but then also in this crazy swirling pattern of the sky in this great painting of the hawthorn blossom.
Which is very reminiscent of Van Gogh.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it's both very kind of evocative of a place and yet very much its own thing.
Slightly scary, actually.
It is, yeah, the bushes become these kind of slightly grotesque, animalistic forms.
Yes.
Yeah.
And here we're moving into really a fascinating and beautiful room, which is, I think, called The Four Seasons.
That's
is that
right.
right? And it's he created these films in 2011.
Yeah. 2011, 10, 11, 12, I think he's
yes,
making them.
Because they do span the seasons.
Exactly. So these grew out of the paintings we just looked at. And what he's done here is he put 9 cameras on the front of a Land Rover pointing in different directions and then drove down this road.
Gosh.
But, again, it's him trying to find a way of creating, a picture of a place that's closer to the way you experience it in real life. And then he subsequently turned it into a kind of room installation by showing all 4 seasons on different walls. So you get this completely immersive experience. And what's wonderful and what's amazing, because he's also saying something very powerful about nature, is that they're timed so that you're passing the same point at the same time in each film.
I hadn't
but
noticed
often
that.
it's almost unrecognizable. It's sort of, the character of the place changes so dramatically.
Yes. It's fascinating how interested he is in new technology all the time. I mean, that he would have done this.
Yeah, he's always been fascinated by trying different ways of making pictures. I mean, even at the Royal College, he was sort of very early on, sort of took up etching. He said because he couldn't afford canvases. And new technologies have come along, and he's taken them up. The photocopier he used to make homemade prints, the fax he used to send pictures. And then Polaroid, digital, the video, and then later we'll see the iPads. But at the same time, there's these more traditional things.
And in fact, these drawings of his garden, I think.
Well, this is the landscape in Yorkshire.
In Yorkshire.
So this is the last thing he made in Yorkshire before he moved back to America. There are 25 drawings, 5 different spots at 5 moments as the spring arrives. It's called The Arrival of Spring.
And these are charcoal, aren't they? Which we don't see anywhere else in the exhibition.
No, I mean, it's almost like he gave up drawing for a couple of decades, and then he's coming back, and to make it new, I guess for him, he's using another new medium, charcoal, very traditional, of course, but new for him, and very evocative.
Let's look at some of the most recent paintings, which are almost in the penultimate room of the exhibition.
Yeah.
These were created in 2016.
Yes, I mean, this one we're looking at here we were told might be tacky when it arrived because it was only varnished sort of over Christmas. And these are, I suppose one of the things to say is that because so much of David's art is about just thinking about pictures, often it's just the people who happen to be around him or the things around him. So these are views of his garden. He's just stepped outside onto the terrace.
Yes.
But again, you see him exploring different ways of describing the space, whether it's through a steep perspective or just this sort of the contrast between the very face-on balustrade of the balcony and then the pool beyond.
And the shadows in the pool.
Yeah,
and again, this
exactly.
almost surreal use of colour. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, no, really heightened and quite different actually to the sort of heightened colour of a few years earlier.
Yes. And this is the very final room of the exhibition in which there are some of the incredible iPad and iPhone pictures that keep changing. I mean, you can stand here for
yes, so there's 50 or 60 images in here. And just as the last room sort of documented his move from Yorkshire back to California in analog media, if you like, this does the same in in digital. So these 3 screens here have a series of images, I mean several dozen, all of his bedroom window in Bridlington in Yorkshire where he was living. It's on the East Coast, so you get these wonderful sunrises, but he captures it in different seasons. So you see snow on the window or raindrops, day, night, the building work going on at the house opposite, or the things that are on the windowsill. And I think what's wonderful about ending on this is that all of Hockney's art is kind of rooted in drawing, and that drawing is rooted in looking at the world. He talks about drawing as being a discipline to make you look more closely.
Yes.
And here you can see that, both because of the immediacy of the drawing he makes, but also because you can see the way the drawings evolve. They're animated. For the first, he was very excited by this, and only with the invention of the iPad, he could see how he drew.
See the very
and
process.
you can see, it's both a sort of the construction of an image, very technical, but also just the way an artist, this artist, looks at the world and edits out, a lot of it, but then, lights on certain key details to make something evocative.
Chris, thank you so much for taking us through this.
No,
This
it's
is
a
Rosalind
pleasure.
Salkis for the New York Times at Tate Britain at the wonderful Hockney retrospective that opens here on Thursday. And I'm with Chris Stevens, who's the lead curator of modern British art.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.